they doubt the kid. I'm about to prove them all wrong again. I got a low tolerance, cause they don't even know what the problem is. It's me. You waiting on the boy to fail, then hold your breath and face your death. Cause you play a roulette with each step I progress, no less. Go ahead and place your bets, cause we know where we at, we know we top tier. Cause all the hate that you bring, we know it stops here. I'm taking off like a rocket here, ain't stopping here. It's strange how they cannot see the future, but see profit here. Wait up, we gon' always win. Tell 'em I can't take no loss. My team hold no L's, no. Aiming for the top, can't make it by myself.
Thank you very much.
Oh, there it is. There it
A
is.
short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. God bless the Middle East, God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, you know the news. You know what we're going to be talking about today here on Brett Breaks Things. You already know. How could I not? A spectacular success. We unleashed Operation Midnight Hammer on Iranian interests. Okay? And I know what you want to get into. I know how you're feeling. I'm feeling the same thing. What justification? Is this legal? Have we been lied to about Iran's nuclear capability? Have we not? Are we doing this because Israel wants us to? Are we in danger? Was Congress even notified? I'm going to get into all of this. All of it. A spectacular success? This really reminds me of another moment in recent U.S. history. Remember that? Mission accomplished. Remember that? Mission accomplished. I can't help but be reminded of that moment in this moment. A spectacular success. I have my doubts, and I'm not the only one who has doubts about the success of this mission. He has claimed that Iran's nuclear program has been completely and totally obliterated. After we sent 7 stealth bombers, all armed with the GBU-57 bunker buster bombs, okay? When we launched these strikes, we launched a diversionary fleet maneuver to throw the Iranians off. We also launched a massive cyber attack at the exact same time to blind Iranian radar, spoof their missiles, spoof their alerts, and cut internal military comms in Iran. A massive cyber attack was launched when we launched these planes. 14 bunker busters were unleashed Seven of them on Fordow alone. A wave of Tomahawk missiles preceded and succeeded these bunker buster attacks. Tomahawks launched from our fleet nearby. And he claims spectacular success is what he claims. Iranian officials acknowledged the strikes but claimed minimal disruption to uranium enrichment or their weapons programs. That's what they claim. Obviously, a boulder of salt goes with that. And regionally, there's been an uptick in activity among the proxy groups of Iran. Most notably, Hezbollah and the Shia militants in Iraq are now activated. In what way? We're yet to find out, okay? And NATO and European leaders urged de-escalation. The UN Security Council had an emergency session, and China and Russia specifically called for restraint while condemning U.S. unilateral action. And we're going to get into that UN Council meeting in just a little bit. We're going to get into the specifics of that. I do want to mention this, because this isn't being talked about quite enough. The projected Iranian response, what could it look like? Now, they don't have missiles that can reach U.S. soil. Their ICBM program is not advanced enough to reach U.S. soil. And according to the IAEA, they were not close yet to weaponizing, putting these nuclear weapons, even if they were close to having the weapons themselves, they were not close to mounting them on an ICBM to launch over to us. So their ICBM, their rocketry program, had not reached levels that they could hit our soil. So what does a retaliation look like? Well, obviously, cyber attacks. That's a huge concern. Cyber attacks on U.S. financial, infrastructure, energy systems, things of that nature. Certainly a possibility. They could, it's from all reports, their proxies have been activated. They're on the move. Obviously, attacks through their proxy organizations is definitely a possibility, high possibility, that their proxy groups are going to be activated on this. And of course, they're going to run and cry to Russia and China, right? Their biggest allies. And they're going to reach out to them for help. Some weapon supplies, help rebuilding their facilities, and even help furthering their nuclear program. And we'll talk about that. Russia, Vladimir Putin has said, yeah, we're going to help them. And I'll get into his statements when I get into the UN response. But one thing they're not talking about on this list of proposed responses from Iran is terrorist attacks. Terrorist attacks. Are there already Iranian cells in our borders? Maybe. I think a lot of you would say, absolutely, Brett. There has been 30 million illegal immigrants pouring across our border due to Biden's destructive policies, right? That's the line you like to tell me. And of course, you're gonna tack on any foreign entities you want on that overarching and unverifiable number that you like to throw at people. So I know a lot of people on the right would say they're here. They're here. Okay, maybe. Could the cells here carry out something devastating? Maybe they're already in the planning. But I submit that if they are not, they will be now. I submit that that may be Iran's greatest weapon against the United States right now. That might be one of their greatest options. One of the most devastating options on the table, depending on their planning, their resources, and of course, execution. And I want to just take a second to describe to you one of the people that are in the way of that happening. Now I've lost my Fugate paper, of course. This guy Fugate, he has been elevated. Where did I put that? Well, this gentleman Fugate has been elevated, a young graduate out of the University of Texas, San Antonio. All the way up till 2020, he had been a self-described gardener. Then after that, he held a job as a grocery clerk, all the while being active on social media, call himself a trumpetician. He landed himself a job as an intern at the Heritage Foundation, all while this Project 2025 thing got rolling. And this grocery clerk has now been elevated to a upper position in our anti-terrorism unit in DHS. He's one of the main stopgaps to terrorism inside our borders. He is the one that has been tasked with great responsibility to protect us here in America. And when he got appointed, there were multiple sources saying this is a bad mistake, not qualified. ProPublica said his vitaes were not there. Basically, his professional resume in terms of politics, when people get high-ranking political positions, they look at this vitae and they try to evaluate whether they are qualified for this position. Everybody across the board, no qualifications at all for this position. He's basically, a Trump sycophant, loudly so for years, wildly unqualified. People have been calling for him to be removed from this position. He's going to be the one to stop Iran from carrying out a gigantic attack in U.S. soil. But in terms of this great success, Iran only got to 60% enriched uranium. Okay, they got to 60% enriched uranium. And here's the thing. Most of that, 400 kilograms of that, it appears were moved, from all reports, were moved before this attack. So honestly, the thing that you were most worried about, their enriched uranium stockpile, it may have been completely untouched, moved to safety. They still have it. And as far as the extensive damage to these sites, there's a big question as to how extensive it really was and how long it could take Iran to rebuild these facilities or build new ones and resume their enrichment program, especially if Russia has already said publicly that they are committed to helping Iran along. So we're going to get more into this, obviously, as we keep going. But I had to stop right there at spectacular success and the obliteration of the Iranian program. What follows these attacks, whether it be, more military action, depending on the Iran response, depending on what happens in the Strait of Hormuz, depending on what happens with our military personnel in the region, anywhere from them continuing to strike Israel, all the way up to a full-out war, anything in between, it could all have been for naught. It could all have been for naught. All of this could be moot, because Iran has the very real possibility of continuing to enrich uranium, maintaining their current stockpile, and gaining advancements from the Russian, from Putin and the Russian government, and possibly China, and possibly Pakistan, and possibly North Korea. All of them could step up and assist Iran.
It's time for a quick break, then we break some more. You're listening to Brett Breaks Things. You're back with Brett Breaks Things, because democracy doesn't defend itself.
And so just to put a point on that stockpile of enriched uranium, J.D. Vance has acknowledged on ABC that the U.S. is uncertain where this uranium is. The IAEA chief Rafael Grossi confirmed that the fuel had last been seen before Israel's attacks and now appears to have been completely moved. Okay, that's 400 kilograms of enriched uranium that they don't know where it is. So I'm not sure how Trump can sit there and definitively say their nuclear weapons program has been obliterated. Complete mission success. When your own vice president, the never Trump guy, says we actually don't know. What we do know is it has been moved. What we don't know is where the heck it is or if it's even been touched. That's your guy. That's your guy. So, I just wanted to play this real quick. Bernie was at a fight oligarchy rally, and he got the news.
Power.
Okay, sorry about that.
Conclude.
Gets handed the paper. Some psychic people in the audience booing before he even reads what was on it.
This is a statement from Donald Trump, quote, "We have completed our very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran," etc.
Yeah, not a fan. Not a fan of the warmongering at the fight oligarchy rally with Bernie. Go figure. Not a big fan. Pete Hegseth and General Dan Caine, they rushed to the mic to talk about this on the heels of the attack.
Many presidents have dreamed of delivering the final blow to Iran's nuclear program, and none could until President Trump. The operation President Trump planned was bold and it was brilliant, showing the world that American deterrence is back. When this president speaks, the world should listen. And the U.S. military, we can back it up. The most powerful military the world has ever known. No other country on planet Earth could have conducted the operation that the chairman is going to outline this morning. Not even close. Just like Soleimani found out in the first term, Iran found out when POTUS says 60 days that he seeks peace and negotiation, he means 60 days of peace and negotiation. Otherwise, that nuclear program, that nuclear capability will not exist. He meant it. This is not the previous administration.
He is the most powerful. He is the most... What happened to speak softly and carry a big stick? He is the most powerful in the world, nay, the galaxy. Romulans could not put together a strike this successful. Nobody in the galaxy. And by the way, in terms of stopping the Iranian nuclear program, Clinton had done it and Obama had done it without going to war. Remember, you said this president's too weak to make a deal. He's too weak to make a deal. Well, that president you were referring to made a deal that was working, that you pulled out of. The president that was too weak to make a deal is the strongest, most powerful president in the galaxy. Mr. Art of the Deal could not make a deal. And so he had to resort to violence. I find that ironic on a number of levels. Hegseth, I mean, that is the proper level of reverence for his dear leader. This dude gives great mic. Trump, honestly, when he listens to Hegseth, I mean, he has got to feel like this is my vision for my underlings. This guy is the shining example. You know, he handpicked him from Fox News, loved the propaganda, loved the spin, and has brought that to the Department of Defense. The spin, the propaganda, the reverence for his dear leader. When Trump is sad, the clouds cry. When he's happy, flowers bloom up. He shot a 20 on the last time he went golfing. Yeah. Hegseth gives good mic. Dan Caine, the general, he's got a little practicing. He's got a little work to do. He's got a little ways to go to get to Hegseth reverence level. But he gives it a shot. We got a couple of vids here.
At midnight Friday into Saturday morning, a large B-2 strike package comprised of bombers launched from the continental United States. As part of a plan to maintain tactical surprise, part of the package proceeded to the west and into the Pacific as a decoy. a deception effort known only to an extremely small number of planners and key leaders here in Washington and in Tampa. At approximately 6:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 2:10 a.m. Iran time, the lead B-2 dropped 2 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator weapons on the first of several aim points at Fordo. As the president stated last night, the remaining bombers then hit their targets as well, with a total of 14 MOPs dropped against 2 nuclear target areas. All 3 Iranian nuclear infrastructure targets were struck between 6:40 p.m. and 7:05 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, that's about 2:10 in the morning local time in Iran, with the Tomahawk missiles being the last to strike at Esfahan to ensure we retain the element of surprise throughout the operation. As the Secretary said, this was the largest B-2 operational strike in U.S. history and the second longest B-2 mission ever flown, exceeded only by those in the days following 9/11.
Okay. So I don't think it's a coincidence he invoked 9/11 there. That's General Dan Caine. Now, he showed up with Hegseth. Now, I want you to listen to this one, because even though these two are both on the same team, and you figure they discussed briefly at least what they would be addressing when they each took the podium here together. So you're going to see Hegseth and Caine together here, and I want you to listen to the differences, okay?
Last night, on President Trump's orders, U.S. Central Command conducted a precision strike in the middle of the night against 3 nuclear facilities in Iran, Fordo, Natanz, and Esfahan, in order to destroy or severely degrade Iran's nuclear program. And as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs will demonstrate, it was an incredible and overwhelming success.
Overwhelming success.
The order we received from our commander-in-chief was focused, it was powerful, and it was clear. We devastated the Iranian nuclear program.
Devastated.
I know that battle damage is of great interest. Final battle damage will take some time, but initial battle damage assessments indicate that all 3 sites sustained extremely severe damage and destruction. More than 125 U.S. aircraft participated in this mission.
So right after the head of the Department of Defense says, obliterated, total success, seconds later, General Caine comes behind him and says, well, total assessment's going to take time. And they did receive devastating destruction. The general did not say complete obliteration. And how could you know it's complete obliteration if your own general is telling you the assessment will take time? They are all over the place. We saw dissension of opinion. We saw differences of opinion between Tulsi Gabbard and the president himself and Mike Johnson and Pete Hegseth. They're all saying different things, not on the same page there. And these two, who are on the same stage at the same time, are not on the same page. Wouldn't you want to get that little detail wrinkled out before you tell the American public and the rest of the world total success, obliteration? That's very clear what you are saying there, Pete, and not quite so clear what the general is telling you. Not quite as clear. More Hegseth.
Concerning the justification for these strikes, in March, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released their threat assessment, concluding, quote, Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Caine has not authorized the nuclear programs he suspended in 2003, unquote. So what new intelligence does the U.S. have since then that the Iranians have changed their position on nuclear weapons? And does this new intelligence come from U.S. sources and methods, or are we getting this information from other countries?
Well, I would just simply say that the president's made it very clear. He's looked at all of this, all of the intelligence, all of the information, and come to the conclusion that the Iranian nuclear program is a threat, and was willing to take this precision operation to neutralize that threat in order to advance American national interests, reduce the Iranian nuclear program, and obviously collective self-defense of ourselves and our allies. So he looked at all of it, understood the nature of the threat, and took bold action I think the American people would expect in a commander-in-chief.
So the IAEA says they're not close to nuclearizing their enriched uranium. Your own Director of National Intelligence tells you they are not close to having the nuclear bomb. And this reporter asks your head of Department of Defense, what new intelligence? Where did you get it? What new intelligence, opposed to what you're being told by your own Department of Intelligence, what new intelligence have you received? And what's Hegseth's response? The president has looked at it. What do you mean he's looked at it? What is he in a ghillie suit crawling across the desert, taking surveillance of the nuclear facilities himself? He has particular insight, the president does, that allows him to do this? Where was the intelligence?
Breaking politics, breaking narratives, breaking news. But first, we need a call. Brett breaks things. Fighting for America, one mic drop at a time.
They were notified after the planes were safely out. Well, we complied with the notification requirements of the War Powers Act.
They were notified.
They were immediately thereafter.
Okay, so we're going to get into the War Powers Act and the justification of these attacks, how those justifications have been ingested by the global community and the UN specifically. But he's saying they were informed. Actually, they normally, when it comes to military activity, military actions taken by the U.S., they that he is referring to should mean the Gang of Eight. And I know you've heard of the Gang of Eight. Many of you know who they are. It refers to a bipartisan group of U.S. congressional leaders who are briefed on the most sensitive intelligence matters by the executive branch. These are the 8 people in Congress who have been handpicked for whatever reason throughout to be briefed on these types of military actions, especially on short notice. That's who he is supposed to brief. 48 hours is what he's supposed to give Congress prior to any attack, according to the War Powers Act. 48 hours. In this current Gang of Eight, you've got Majority Leader John Thune. He was notified just after. You've got Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. He was left in the dark. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. He was notified. It's unclear where in the timeline exactly that John Thune and Mike Johnson were notified, but they were notified. Hakeem Jeffries, there's reports that he was notified after the planes took off. And also left in the dark, Democrat out of Virginia, Mark Warner, the Vice Chair, Susan Collins, the Chair, Mike Turner, and the Ranking Member, Jim Hines. That is the group of 8 that is supposed to be briefed 48 hours before any military action. It's unclear, again, just how beforehand Johnson and Thune specifically were told. And then a couple more were told after the planes took off. Okay, that does not adhere to the War Powers Act. That particular aspect does not adhere. So CNN is reporting on this about Johnson knowing. I want to play this real quick out of CNN.
So we're learning, by the way, that some Republican U.S. lawmakers were, in fact, told in advance about these strikes on Iran. Sources telling CNN they include the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, and the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune. But top Democrats on the House and Senate Intelligence Committees were kept in the dark. That's what we're told. Their Republican counterparts were briefed, even though they all are members of the so-called Gang of Eight, who are usually almost always notified before major U.S. military engagements.
Okay. All right. So Iran did release a statement, okay? And they talked about their response a little bit. Iran launched a ballistic, first of all, their actual responses, they launched a ballistic missile counterstrike on Israeli targets. Almost all were civilian casualties. The Iranian Royal Guard then said that our U.S. bases in Iraq, Qatar, Bahrain are now legitimate targets, okay? Obviously risking a larger escalation of this conflict. And Iran did talk about this.
We are facing a situation after 2 or 3 months of negotiations, 5 rounds of negotiations with Trump administration, suddenly we came under a surprise attack by Israel. Instead of Americans trying to rein in Benjamin Netanyahu, now they are joining hands in attacking Iran's nuclear installations. That would be a detrimental blow to international law, to the United Nations, and by the way, the United States is a founding member of the United Nations. The United States is a permanent member of the Security Council. The United States is the headquarters of this organization. Now they are attacking a non-nuclear weapon state in collusion with each other.
He talks about a violation of international law and a violation of the UN Charter. And we're going to get directly into that. Has this happened before? Has the U.S. president ever done anything like this before? Yes. Yes. Reagan did something similar in Libya in 1986, Clinton in Iraq in 98, and Trump himself in Syria in 2018. And guess who else? Obama in 2014. In 2013, Syria had used chemical weapons against its own people, and Obama wanted to go to war with them. And he went and he asked Congress for permission to go to war. But before it got there, there was a UN resolution between Russia and some other countries, and they stemmed the tide of war in that instance. No vote was ever had in Congress. No war was started through Obama. And in 2013, there was a diplomatic resolution to the situation in 2013. But then, as ISIS started to ramp up its activities in Syria, Obama did strike ISIS targets inside Syria. Something similar to what we have here. He did not face impeachment. He did not face international backlash, anything official, and no resolutions in the UN over those strikes. But he did as well. So there is precedent for strikes of this nature. But the 1973 War Powers Act, it requires 48 hours of notification before a retaliatory or preventative strike. There has to be an imminent threat or us being attacked first. And the Gang of 8 should have had 48 hours. Not the Gang of 2, not the Gang of John Thune and Mike Johnson. The Gang of 8 should have been informed 48 hours before this. Period. In terms of the international law perspective, the UN Charter has specific articles for this. Under Article 51, it allows force an armed attack to respond to an imminent threat. Okay, and this is where it starts to get muddy. This is where the talking points you've been seeing out of Trump and Johnson and Hegseth, this is where that comes in. 2 weeks away. 2 weeks away. We have to do it now, or there's going to be a nuclear attack. That's the imminent threat that they had been floating, pointing at without actually saying we're going to get bombed with a nuclear weapon. They stopped short of saying that specifically, but the indications they were pointing at were this is an imminent threat. Imminent. And they're trying to tell us that they're not including Israel's strikes themselves inside Iran as any type of impetus for this. They have to keep that separate. So they're saying U.S. was imminently threatened by Iran. That is their justification. But the pushback to that is that it is completely unclear whether Iran could imminently attack any U.S. interests with a nuclear weapon. They had 60% of the 90% enrichment percentage. It's close, but not there. They don't have the ICBM technology, the rocketry, to hit the U.S., and they do not know exactly how yet to attach those nuclear bombs to the ICBMs. Now, Israel initiated hostilities on June 13th. So another claim of the Trump administration is we are doing these strikes in defense of Israel. But Israel initiated the strikes on June 13th. But I think we can all agree this whole situation was initiated on October 7th. That massacre inside Israel, that initiated this. That initiated Hamas being wiped from Palestine. That initiated the Hezbollah leadership getting decimated in Lebanon. And now Israel is dead set on finishing the job. They crippled the two proxy nations, the two proxy groups that are right there on their border. And now they want to cripple the money. They want to cripple the funding. They want to cripple the source of these proxies, Iran. They want to finish the job. And they know they have a measure of global, I don't want to say permission, but they do have sympathy in terms of their reaction to October 7th. That's when this really got initiated, right? But in terms of Article 51, they can't really claim in defense of Israel because Israel began hostilities on June 13th. And what about the Non-Proliferation Treaty? Well, Iran really never broke that. There's 191 nations in the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel not being on them, although they have nuclear weapons. They aren't, unofficially, they have nuclear weapons, but they want no part of the NPT, right? They're not beholden in any way to be part of the NPT, but they want to point at Iran, and they want to say Iran is in violation of the NPT, when in reality, the 60% enrichment does not violate the NPT. Does not violate it. One of the main sticking points of the NPT is taking your enriched uranium and attaching it to a missile. No evidence they have that capability at all. That's from the IAEA themselves. Okay? And, I talked about Iran's response, the ballistic missile counterstrike on Israel. Yeah, no skin off Trump's back, right? You strike inside Iran, you dismantle 3 enrichment facilities, and Iran bombs Israel. And that's why I feel like this move by Trump, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, was a little cowardly. A little cowardly. You wait till operatives are inside Iranian borders. You wait till missiles are being shot back and forth. And you wait till Israel themselves cripple Iran's air defense, ground-to-air missile installations, radar installations. You wait till Israel goes in and does the dirty work and their civilians are getting pummeled. Then you go in and you get your bombers in there. Or was that the plan all along? Is that what Bibi and Trump have been discussing at length? We have the justification to do these things because our people are constantly under attack by Iranian proxies. October 7th was one of the greatest tragedies in the Middle Eastern history. And we will have global diplomatic coverage to do these things. And once we initiate these things, you come in and you finish the job with those bunker busters, right? We'll send operatives over the border. We'll let our citizens take the hit. We'll cripple their defenses. You fly in. Just ramp up your rhetoric now. Start ramping it up now and talking about how we're 2 weeks out from an Iranian nuclear threat. You got to hit that sticking point, Donald. You got to hit it because there's going to be blowback in the UN, and there is. They had an emergency meeting, the UN did. Ambassador Dorothy Shea defended the strikes in the UN, saying they were necessary to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran, warning of devastating retaliation if Iran has the gumption to do anything about this. Told the UN, Iran better keep in line, even in the face of our strikes. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres issued a statement calling the operation a dangerous escalation and pressing all nations to pursue diplomacy and de-escalation, although no resolution got passed in the UN. Gutierrez, tough talk out of you, but no resolution was passed. We'll get more into the international backlash in the next segment, because there certainly was some. And like I mentioned, Russia's got something to say about this.
We'll be back to break it all down. You're listening to Brett Breaks Things. Now back to Brett Breaks Things, smashing spin, silencing the noise, and keeping it all facts. No fluff.
John, I think the president has been very clear that we are not interested in protracted conflicts in the Middle East, but there's a question about how do you achieve peace, and we believe the way that you achieve peace is through strength. We took a very narrow and limited approach to destroying the Iranian nuclear program, John. That's what the president did, and I think that, more than anything, is going to ensure peaceful resolution in that region of the world. You can't be weak. You can't sit there and allow the Iranians to achieve a nuclear weapon, John, and expect that's going to lead to peace. It would lead to absolutely disastrous military conflict all over the Middle East. We don't want that. Our Gulf Arab nation allies don't want that. Israel doesn't want that. And it's one of the few issues, frankly, that unites the Arabians to the Israelis is none of them want the Iranians to get a nuclear weapon because they know that it would lead to the opposite of peace.
So we avoided military action and conflict in the region by executing military action and conflict in the region. And by the way, I mentioned what was Putin's response, and I got to go past so much stuff. There's so much to get to today. I even wanted to talk about OKC's championship. They made history. They beat the Indiana Pacers last night. OKC's first championship. I hope some of you guys watched that. I did as well. It's a good game. A little bit of history being made. That's aside. So Putin, what did he have to say about this before we keep going? This is an absolutely unprovoked attack of aggression against Iran. It has no basis or justification. He added Russia was making efforts to provide assistance to the Iranian people. And the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has written a letter to Putin asking for more help than he's already given. And then in another presser on Russian state TV, he had said, specifically Putin had said, we want to help Iran with its peaceful nuclear program. We want to help them. Of course, he's going to tack peaceful on there because, well, Putin's all about peace, right? He's a peaceful guy. So there is one really interesting part to this, one interesting aspect to this, and I didn't mention it earlier when I talked about possible Iranian responses to this, and this one could affect you and me. And JD speaks to it right here.
If Iran disrupts shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, which of course handles about a quarter of the world's oil trade, would that be a red line for the United States, Mr. Vice President?
Well, Kristen, I think our biggest red line is the Iranian nuclear weapons program. That is really what the president has said we need to get rid of.
But what about the Strait of Hormuz?
Steps towards doing that last night. Well, I think that would be suicidal, Kristen, for the Iranians themselves. I mean, their entire economy runs through the Strait of Hormuz. If they want to destroy their own economy and cause disruptions in the world, I think that would be their decision. But why would they do that? I don't think it makes any sense. I don't think that it makes sense for them or for anybody else. What would make sense is for them to come to the negotiating table to actually give up their nuclear weapons program over the long term. And again, if they're willing to do that, they're going to find a willing partner in the United States of America.
Okay. He's talking about the Strait of Hormuz. Okay. He's talking about the Strait of Hormuz. That is where 20% of the world's oil supply passes through. Will they shut it down? Now, the Iranian parliament has already passed a measure to put that through, a measure to go through, to close the strait. It's already passed. So it's ultimately up to the Ayatollah Khamenei whether to do that or not. And that decision is going to be made soon. If they do, that could have devastating effects on U.S. oil prices, U.S. gas prices, devastating effects. What kind of effects? Well, Energy analysts warn that even a partial closure of the Strait of Hormuz would spike oil prices to $120 to $150 a barrel, and some are projecting it could go even as high as $200 per barrel, triggering global inflation and supply chain chaos if it goes to 200. And the U.S. has issued strong military warnings with fleets right there in Bahrain and other places in the region if they should do this. So just more heavy-handed rhetoric aimed towards the Iranians, this time in response to a possible closure of this strait. Like I said, the Ayatollah, he's going to be the one to make that decision. But they're projecting gas prices could spike to as high as $5 a barrel or $5 a gallon, even higher. That is something that I would think that Trump would be willing to use military action to stop from happening, because those gas prices, it's a little delayed, right? From the catalyst to whatever's going to make the gas prices higher to the actual price at the pumps, there's usually a small delay. So especially if Trump doesn't go to war with Iran, let's say this doesn't end in war, but it does end or does involve a closure of this strait, gas prices will spike on him and there'll be no way around it. And you will be able to add another factor to a possible defeat for the Republicans in the midterms. Another factor, especially if they're not able to control it in a timely fashion. And if we're not in a war at that time, like if we're in a war, he can say, look, we're in a war. Iran poses this huge nuclear threat to the globe, and we're fighting a war on behalf of our Middle Eastern allies and every democracy around the world, right? They can play that game if we're at war and say, look, the gas is high, but that's a small price to pay for keeping Iran from being a nuclear threat. And I think a lot of Republicans and independents would get on board with that. Hey, he's doing what he's got to do, right? He's doing what he's got to do if we're at war. If for some reason they can prove enough or explain enough their justification for doing this, right? No international backlash, no UN resolutions, right? And we go to war and gas prices spike, they can point to that, say, hey, we're at war. But if we're not at war and we have a prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz, there's going to be no dancing around it for Trump. It's going to be higher, way higher gas prices under his administration. And at that time, a month or 2 months from this closure, there will be no pointing to Biden's failed economy then. You will have been president for 4, 5, 6 months whenever this happens. There will be no pointing to Biden's failures, Biden's administration, Biden's economic policies. Nope. The shelf life on that little talking point has run up, especially at this point. So I want you to keep that in mind and keep a close eye on what happens here in the Strait of Hormuz. And Iran has done this before, and Iran has used military intervention to keep the flow of oil from getting through the strait when they have deemed it closed. They have used missile strikes. They have used military action against other nations to keep the strait closed. It's happened before, and we may be staring at it again. Also, in terms of political backlash and international backlash, one sticking point to this possibly being justified is that we are not going to invade. It was a preventative military action. Imminent danger, and we acted. Okay. Now, with the proper evidence and intelligence, I may even be convinced of that. With proper evidence and intelligence pointing to a higher than 60% enrichment, one report said it was at 83. You can prove that, or at least prove to me that they were mounting them on missiles, and a launch is an actual imminent threat. I'm on board. I'm not on board with war, but I am philosophically, essentially on board with not getting bombed by Iran. And if you can prove to me, and you haven't even tried, that the threat was actually imminent, I may be on board with that. But what I'm not on board with, what the UN is not on board with, what international law, Russia, China are not on board with, is regime change. And I believe that right now, Trump is making a giant mistake, tweeting out on Truth Social, regime change. It is not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? MIGA, M-I-G-A, make Iran great again. Now, you're making a real mistake. You think you're being cute. You think you're being clever. He thinks he's talking to the Iranian people. I promise you, because he does these messages on Truth Social and he tweets these things, and MAGA is listening, right? And they get all of their talking points and they get all riled up and they love tweets and messages from their dear leader. And so Trump assumes that if I'm messaging it out to any group of person, they're listening. Of course, I'm Donald Trump. Why wouldn't they be? So if I send a direct message to the Iranian people, they'll listen too. But they're not listening. The UN is listening. Other nations are listening. But the Iranian people are not plugged into your Truth Social, Don. And just tweeting out, make Iran great again, is not going to have droves of Iranians ready to die to overthrow the Ayatollah Khomeini, because that's what you want, really. You want to get their people frothy. And they may be frothed up enough, because if the Iranian response isn't compensatory to what's happened to them, the Iranian people are going to be upset anyway. All right, they're going to be upset with their leadership if there is no response. But they're not watching your tweets, Don. And his sycophants have been talking regime change as well. I'm telling you, this is a mistake.
That we don't want a regime change. We do not want to protract this or build this out any more than it's already been built out. We want to end their nuclear program, and then we want to talk to the Iranians about a long-term settlement here. We believe very strongly that there are two pathways. There's a pathway where Iran continues to fund terrorism, continues to try to build a nuclear program, attacks American troops. That's the bad pathway for Iran, and it will be met with overwhelming force.
So he says, no regime change. I know what my dear leader said, but no regime change. No regime change. Carolyn Levitt.
When the president is floating the idea of regime change, how does he believe that should be accomplished? Through the Iranians, the Israelis, or the Americans?
The president's posture and our military posture has not changed. The president was just simply raising a question that I think many people around the world are asking. If the Iranian regime refuses to give up their nuclear program or engage in talks, we just took out their nuclear program on Saturday night, as you all know. But if they refuse to engage in diplomacy moving forward, why shouldn't the Iranian people rise up against this brutal terrorist regime? That's a question the president raised last night. But as far as our military posture, it hasn't changed.
Iranian people, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not asking you. I'm not telling you what to think. I'm just asking if you'd like to. Would you like to think about regime change, Iranian people? Would you like to think about it? Let's talk about it. No, it's pretty clear. And I've already run out of time. I had more, but I wanted to leave you with a familiar voice from the past, a man who successfully dealt with the Iranian program without bombing people, without piggybacking on Israeli military action in the region, without destabilizing the entire Middle East. Here's a man who successfully dealt with the Iranian nuclear threat.
Mr. Netanyahu has long wanted to fight Iran because that way he can stay in office forever and ever. I mean, he's been there most of the last 20 years. But I think we should be trying to diffuse it. And I hope President Trump will do that. I hope anybody there will do that. We've got to stop. We got to convince our friends in the Middle East that we'll stand with them and try to protect them. But choosing undeclared wars in which the primary victims are civilians who are not politically involved one way or the other, just want to live decent lives, is not a very good solution. Do I think that we have to try to stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon? I do. I tried at that, and we had some success. But we don't have to have all this outright, constant killing of civilians who can't defend themselves, and they just want a chance to live.
I mean, and that's really the point, right? In all of this back and forth, it's the civilians who pay. It's the civilians who end up getting killed.
They'll try to repair the narrative, but Brett Breaks things will be back Monday to break it all down.